Wolverine regeneration, new generation stem cells and genetic medicines. You know, I think things a lot of us that are starting to age need, and also as we put our bodies through like a significant amount of stress, and also for those of us that like really love sports or like running up into people, etc. And also I saw we have some of the very famous MMA community here too, floating around. And anyway, I just Shane, probably starting with you. I'd love to hear a little bit about background. You're sort of clinically involved also, so you know if you could share a little bit that about us, and just also how you've experienced these new modalities, how people responding to the queries, like the cultural intrigue, etc.
Yeah, so just a bit of a background. I actually come from an athletic background, thus the link with the enhanced games. At the age of 21, I was the 10th strongest man in the world and 130 kilos, a shadow of what I was. Unfortunately, in reaching your potential, you don't know what your potential is until you exceed it. And that for me was tearing my pec major off the bone, both biceps off the bone, both supraspinatus, both knees reconstructed, hamstring off the bone, and a broken back. So no, cumulatively. So ultimately, my athletic career was over, and I'd just done a degree in biochemistry, a postgraduate in nutrition, and then a third degree in exercise physiology, so I could become #1 in the world. And now I'm a degenerated 25-year-old. So I changed all that science into what, I'm 58 now, so some 33 years ago, there was no longevity or regenerative medicine, but that's basically the path that I took, using that biochemistry, the nutrition, and then the stimulus through the exercise to work out how I could rebuild myself to start with, then optimize my function moving forward. And lo and behold, here we are 33 years later, and it's a booming industry. So that's how I fit into the equation here.
So I have a far less athletic history. I came out of the world of cybersecurity initially, and got into bio with this thesis that, you know, the essence of life was information, and if you could manipulate that, you could do anything. And back then I was trying to port some of David Baker's software to cryptographic hardware, and use a password cracker to fight a virus. And that led me to start a company called Immusoft, which made the first engineered B-cell therapy to go into human trials. And it was a similar story. I suppose back then there were no approved gene or cell therapies, and the biggest objection was by far, you're insane, you know, that won't work. And now, you know, we have thousands in clinical development, a few dozen approved in the US, and began focusing on aging and longevity, but with the same idea that you can't take enough pills to undo aging. You gotta upgrade the code. And so at Ocean, our lead program now makes you build muscle without exercise, and the others to selectively kill fat cells.
Incredible. And Nina?
Hi, nice to meet everyone. I guess I got into this from a bit of a nerdy background, from a pretty academic family. I actually had 2 colorblind sisters and a brother with a degenerating eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa. And that's what motivated me to get into engineering. So for me, it was actually electrical engineering. I was interested in the brain-computer interface kind of aspect of how we could cure blindness. But of course, electrical signals run everywhere in the body, especially across cell membranes. And I got really interested in figuring out, well, how could we use those electrical signals to grow human tissues in the lab? So I started growing retinal tissue, heart tissue, bone, cartilage, skin, and then started a company years later after a stint as a pharma med device consultant. After I got bored with that, started EpiBone. So EpiBone makes bone and cartilage platform technology. We have completed a phase 1/2A at Cleveland Clinic US, hoping to launch a trial in UAE very soon, mapping that towards osteoporosis. So even though, you know, tissue engineering was only coined in 1988, I think that's interesting to think about 33-year arc. But you know, it wasn't called longevity, but in many ways, you know, skeletal health is human health, you know, and is a huge driver, not just the hard, it's almost like how do you change the tires on well, it's not hardware, but on our apparatus, firmware, so the more we talk about health span, I feel like with skeletal health, it's about joy span. The happier we are, the more we move around, the longer our life. And so we really have found friends within the longevity community. I mean, I think it was very early days when I was at GenSpace, this dates me, first biohacking space in the world, community bio lab, where I met Aubrey de Grey back in like 2010, something like that. That's when I figured out we were actually working on longevity.
Amazing. And this is probably going to be a very familiar question for all of you, but you must speak to people that are just like, when can I have this? Like right now. And you were clapping at the back of the...
maybe I'll just
you should start.
pass it back to you guys and just chime in on that one. So, what happened to me, we called the past 2 years the biotech winter. It was the biggest trough in funding for biotech companies in the history of biotech company getting funded. So it was a really difficult time. And you heard earlier panelists talk about how the math needed to change. And that was over math was when Aaron and I became friends, because we tried to figure out, how do you change the math on clinical trials? And I think one of the interesting ways was to think, well, how do you deal with patients? I kept pitching people, I kept pitching investors, okay, during this biotech winter. And I just kept thinking I needed to pitch more investors. But they kept starting to say, if I invest, can I have your product? If I invest, when can I get the cartilage? And that's when I realized it was taking too long. And I started trying to figure out, how do I treat that patient? And that's when I figured out we needed to move. And so we came here, that's how we met, established operations here in the UAE to kind of accelerate by changing the math, not by changing the science. How do we sell product after safety, but during clinical trials? There are ways to change the math on biotech. And I think that the patients clamoring for access has been a huge driver. And I clapped for Right to Try because EpiBone, our company, has been in operations for 11 years. And we have been in clinical trials, preclinical and clinical trials. So to become legal overnight in 4 US states, one of which is larger than many European countries, is a huge feat on behalf of patients advocating for themselves. So huge hats off to that community for really driving change. Yeah.
Sorry, just
we're planning to launch 5 to 7 years earlier than we planned. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and also very, very helpful for those people that are wandering around and suffering.
Oh my gosh, my sister, my husband, me. I mean, this is everybody. So thanks for the opportunity.
And we'll get back to, because you have real pedigree and rigor around the science you haven't. Maybe just from your perspective, because you're offering, I mean, you're talking about changing the code and going straight to, inherently the building blocks of ourselves. Could you just share a little bit about, we've heard a few things about one of the, you're working on follistatin as one of the prospective sort of modalities or advancements, but maybe just a little bit about the technology itself, and also AbbVie is a big backer of yours. So what does a big pharma company see in muscle health?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, I think the muscle stuff has become suddenly far more attractive to pharma because of the rise of the GLP-1 drugs. And this did something I think really fascinating. If you look back at the first GLP-1s, their forecasted revenue is $80 million a year. It's I think this year it'll hit 70 billion. And this was an obscure diabetes drug. It wasn't there to make vain CEOs and trophy lives look better on the beach. But what it did was it really dawned on big pharma companies that people will pay a lot to look or feel better. And I think that this is probably the first broadly accepted health span improving drug available. The side effects are amazing. The reduction in cardiovascular risk, cancer, all this stuff. And so I think that the loss of muscle mass, though, because of those, has gotten everyone thinking about muscle far more than they used to. But AbbVie itself, I think, is very interesting in that these guys are the undisputed world leader in injectable aesthetic medicine. So Botox, breast implants, fillers, these kinds of things. And that's a very different than just a cosmetic. And what I think is going to be fascinating about this is that as regenerative medicine moves along, it will set up a winner-take-all type environment in the aesthetic space. Because do you really need makeup if you can regrow your own tissue? Think about it, and very few companies are actually equipped with the regulatory chops to to take a drug. I mean, like Botox, you think about this, is one of the most toxic substances known to man. Like you could wipe out everyone with what you can fit in your hand, but it's approved for reducing wrinkles. And I mean, that's a fascinating regulatory conversation to have. Like, and they've mastered this. And so I think that they're, taking steps to basically seeing where the writing is on the wall and the path is going, and looking at some of these tools to secure empire.
Wow.
The interesting thing, we were talking about the regulatory process in being able to use this. As I said, 30 years ago, I needed them, not now. You're just getting follistatin through in terms of a gene therapy. I used follistatin 25 years ago, the problem being the 30-minute half-life.
Yeah.
I had to inject it constantly over the day, and you become pretty tired of that pretty quickly.
You could electroporate it in. So this is actually a great point. So the first drug acting on that pathway that was like in normal human trials, it was 20 years ago. The first follistatin gene therapies, normal ones that were FDA sanctioned 10 years ago. So like we know this pathway pretty well. Like if you think of the Belgian blue cow that kind of inspired all this, that was characterized in the 1800s. And it's just that the science is catching up to it. And like back, on the regulatory side, when I got into the world of bio and medicine from computer science, the one thing that occurred to me is that the person who has no say is the patient. Doctor won't give it to you, you're screwed, insurance won't cover it, not approved. And we don't really count all the bodies that stack up before a drug gets approved. And as therapies have gotten more advanced and moved from like small molecules to biologics and gene therapies, that problem has grown more acute. And so side project, to make a open source in vivo electroporator, a tool to do gene therapy in the developing world or the garage. And we did this with Ebola antibodies initially, but follistatin is a reasonable thing to electroporate in if you don't mind being tased.
And that's the thing, everyone should have their own individual autonomy to take whatever they want, whenever they want, as informed adults. And that's where I was 25 years ago, because I didn't unfortunately know you or have access to it. So I just had to do what I could do with the products and the knowledge that I had. And it worked.
It's impressive you're able to get your hands on it. Actually, the recombinant
that was through, I was on the Australian-China Business Council, so I had access there. But the point is, 25 years later, we're now at this point where we're able to do it. And I have had the follistatin gene therapy. And just to give you some stats, in 4 weeks, I put on 6 kilos of muscle, lost 2 kilos of fat, and that was without changing anything else. I'm very static with training and diet, etc. So the follistatin definitely worked in the gene therapy. But the point is, 25 years ago and today, I don't accept what people tell me I can and can't do with my body. I do as I believe is good for me. And those numbers you're talking about in terms of 70 million for the GLP-1s, that's through pharma sourcing. It's more like 200 billion when you add research grade peptides into the equation. So the market's huge. And they are limiting it, but that doesn't mean people aren't accessing it through research grade protocols.
So just curious, I mean, you must have lots of conversations with people that go through the clinic, asks, wants, need to get my hands on this, those sorts of things.
Asks and wants are one thing, but the therapeutic indications another. So people come in because of social media. I saw this, I saw that. I want follistatin gene therapy. Great for the appropriate indications like perimenopausal or menopausal women that you're trying to save their muscle mass loss during that period, or osteoporosis. So there's clinical indications, and we do that. We look at the diagnosis, we then see whether they're deficient or dysfunctional or diseased, and then give an appropriate treatment, not just what they want.
Yeah. And just sort of taking that a little bit further, because you're talking also about this even more acute problem around health sovereignty, and the fact that, I think about the regulatory environment. We set a bunch of laws and rules even before we knew the structure of DNA, and we haven't really advanced the architecture or the regulatory structure since then. And so, I mean, how much do you effectively feel that, provided a couple constraints, so like very strong understanding of safety, et cetera, that people should be enabled to effectively make their choices, and how much medical oversight or supervision or consultations that should sit in those processes? And is it also variable for like different types of modalities?
I'd say fundamentally, I think I should be the arbiter of what goes into my body. And that doesn't mean that stupidity won't have consequences. So I think when you're looking at like marketing a drug, we have labels that show that it's safe and effective for something. And but historically, the FDA didn't regulate either of those things. All they regulated was that you couldn't lie on the label. And I think that there's a need for a middle ground like this, because it makes sense that a lot of people either don't want to or lack the ability to evaluate any therapeutic you could conceivably take in any circumstance. But in the end, like, I should have the option to. And so maybe you go back to thinking like the predecessor of the FDA was there, when they sold heroin as a children's soothing syrup, to make sure that they properly labeled the bottle. They notably did not say you couldn't give heroin to children. They just said, you have to put this could be dangerous. You need to label it properly. And so I think science is progressing faster than regulation can. And it's not that it's ill-intended or even unnecessary, in the sense like, there has to be something for not everyone can master this, but there also, I think, needs to be a pathway to let it, because I don't want to die waiting for a therapy to exist. And every day, you're on clinical hold or you're in early development, people are out there suffering and dying, and there is very much a cost to the delay.
Nina, a question for you first, and then probably to the rest of the panel. We're talking about people making informed choices, and then also sometimes it's hard to avoid like relative stupidity of people that just like want to put things in their body. How much do we've been talking a lot about AI, I guess, today. It's just always a topic that sort of recurs. What people don't tend to speak about a lot in terms of AI is whether it is like it helps enhance understanding and how relatively informed the public are about approaching certain types of medicines and making health choices and things of the sort. So do you see that as a prospective pathway? What needs to happen? I know that people are sort of like querying LLMs a lot more, but even like, what would it take for someone to effectively look at what you might have to offer, even if it's not effectively approved by the FDA, and consider whether that's, a right choice for them?
Yeah, and we're going through this now. And I think I think we don't like that 90% of regenerative medicine is still outside of complete regulatory purview. People do get hurt when the product is so complex to manufacture. I think at least manufacturing needs to be tightly controlled, or at least tightly regulated. How do patients that I interact with make their decision? Well, I think they ask questions that you're probably not surprised to hear. Like, what have you tested this in before? If it's animals, they're like, okay. As soon as you say human, more, is the data more relevant? The closer the data that exists is relevant to me, the more easy it is for me to make a decision. And I think that's just what we see. And I'm lucky that, at least our modality is easy to explain to people. We're not reprogramming cells, for example, so we don't have to get deep into the explanations of biology. But most people understand that you need diet and exercise inside your body to grow cells. So the idea that our technology provides diet and exercise to cells outside the body to grow tissue is something that makes sense to people. So beyond that, actually people tend to like our technology because we can understand that mice heal similarly in terms of fractures to humans, maybe more similarly than other biological mechanisms. But yeah, it's really data driven. And I don't know what, in terms of AI, I think that, and this alludes to a question you asked on an earlier panel, I do see the willingness of regulators in various geographies to be open to using AI for, you had said synthetic control arms, or even negotiating, like NICE, for example, in UK has signaled that they are open to negotiating prices based on whether or not your structure of your clinical trial utilizes some of their data, right? So I think we're going to start to see folks use data in different ways. I think for us, because we're launching a trial in a hybrid manner, we're launching a product in Florida next year in parallel with seeking FDA approval. Okay, so AI is going to come into play for us because we're going to have to stitch together and have a real data strategy to make sure that we are stitching together our data such that we can submit all that data to FDA. And it's not going to all look like data FDA has seen before, but we are highly optimistic that the FDA will be able to wrap their heads around it, just like a lot of other, sound mind humans. I think there's a lot of common sense that humans have when it comes to looking at data. I think I would like to give the general population more credit than we usually do for their discernment. But yeah, there should be some regulations. I don't like the idea of a total free for all. Yeah, but people are smart.
We're up against time. One last question to the panelists, and it's something I think all of you touched upon. There's also a huge gray market that's effectively hovering around all these things. You mentioned search peptides, things like this. In a lot of my conversations with people from industry, everyone's sort of like very like they're cautiously watching this, and you see new actors coming in every day, et cetera. And that can compromise the whole space if things don't go right. So is there anything that we can effectively do? And how can we make sure that people get the right type of access that they effectively need to regenerative medicines? There isn't too much overall systematic drag, so that you're not kept in a 20-year R&D development loop, and people feel like they're making the right informed risk return sort of assessment. Sorry, Shane, I might start with you.
I think what you just said is embodied in what the enhanced games are doing. That's going to give the athletes their body autonomy. It is medically monitored. Some of the products are outside of the indicated use, but the data is there to show that these athletes will reach their peak potential in a medically monitored manner with their health parameters measured, as opposed to the IOC or the WADA measuring drug use, catching them for drugs. The beauty of the enhanced games is they're monitoring health of the athlete. And ironically, following these athletes for the last year, their health parameters are improving, even though they're using products that are not indicated for sports enhancement. So I think the enhanced games is going to generate enough noise to maybe move this body autonomy in the positive direction.
I think it's worth pointing out that we fundamentally don't understand biology very well. It's not like computer science where every bug was put there by you or your friends. Like we're going blind into a lot of this. And so, but if you consider you had like cancer, you're going to die in a year or something like this, even if you had right to try and all that, like you'd be dead before it got to phase 1. And it took me 10 years to go to phase 1 with the first one. And so I think that we shouldn't delude ourselves about what the risk is with these things. Like there's always a patient zero, basically, right? There's always the first patient in a trial, and there's only so much you can know about it. And generally, if a drug couldn't kill you, it doesn't do anything at all. And so there's going to be a risk of it being fine in most people and dangerous in others. And I think and making sure that the manufacturing of it is regulated is about as good as you can get in this, because no one's going to know what the limit of the enhanced athletes are until they exceed it also. And so I totally support this, but we do have to understand that we're tinkering with a system we can't possibly understand.
Amazing. Any last thoughts, Nina?
Well, if you have any aches and pains, feel free to talk to me, and go to epibone.com/forum if you want to sign up for our patient waiting list. We're treating patients in US and UAE and Thailand.
Well, I'd love to thank you very much. Very entertaining conversation. And track them down and bother them and ask them lots of questions after this. But thank you.
Thank you very much.